right, so those were the top headlines. Now let's get started with the top story. The war in West Asia has entered its 16th day. The situation on the ground is escalating. Both sides are intensifying pressure, militarily, strategically, and economically. As Iran maintains a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz, the US is threatening to destroy its biggest oil hub, export hub, Kharg Island. The small island is Iran's oil lifeline and handles nearly 90% of Iran's oil exports. Iran has effectively tightened its grip over the Strait of Hormuz, signaling it is prepared to choke the route if the conflict escalates further. As many as 20 tankers have been hit as hundreds remain stranded in the narrow sea lane between Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. The response from Washington has been equally sharp. US President Donald Trump has issued a direct warning targeting Kharg Island, Iran's most important oil export terminal. The US has already hit Kharg Island once, and Trump now says he may do it again, even suggesting it could happen just for fun. According to a report by the Institute for the Study of War, nearly 90 targets, that is, on Kharg Island were struck during the US attack. Those strikes damaged and destroyed Kharg's military cover. Iran's most critical oil infrastructure is now exposed. Another US strike could have a devastating impact on Iran's oil facilities and its revenue lifeline. Tehran, however, is not backing down. Iran has issued a clear warning. If its energy infrastructure is targeted, it could strike oil companies linked to the United States across the region. A crucial oil port in the Emirates was reportedly hit. Smoke rose from port in Fujairah as Iran blamed UAE for providing base for the attack on Kharg. Meanwhile, Washington is preparing its next strategic move. Trump is now pushing for a naval collision to secure shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump wants countries including the United Kingdom, France, Japan, South Korea, and even China to send warships to secure the route. Iran, on the other hand, has sent a message of its own. Tehran says the Strait of Hormuz remains open for business, but not for those aligned with the United States and Israel. Both sides are now pushing directly on each other's pressure points. A high-stakes stare-down is underway. And the future of this conflict may ultimately depend on one question: who blinks first? And for more on this, we are now being joined by Dr. Glenn Diesen, the Professor of International Relations at the University of Southeastern Norway, USN. Hi, Dr. Diesen. Thank you so much for joining us on WION today. Now, most recently, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that Tehran is ready to consider any proposal that guarantees a complete end to the war. What are you making of this statement, and what kind of reaction can be expected from Israel and US on this proposal?
Well, the Iranians do not want a simple ceasefire, because in a simple ceasefire, the United States and Israel would simply seek to regroup and replenish their missiles and come back in a few months, just like they attacked in June and now yet again. So for the Iranians, they want to have a permanent settlement to this war. And that it comes with many demands. They already suggested that they want all US bases out of the region. They want compensation or reparation for the attacks on Iran, and they want guarantees that there won't be another surprise attack. again, these demands might seem very high, but again, it's possible that this is just the opening position. In any negotiation, you give and take. But I do think that they want an end to the war. But again, a temporary ceasefire is not an end to the war. It's almost a guarantee that the United States will come back because, as the US and Israel has communicated clearly, they're not going to let the Iranian government stand. And indeed, if they're able to collapse the Iranian government, they're most likely capable of balkanizing Iran and destroying the country. So for them, everything is on the line. So they want a comprehensive peace deal. Unfortunately, though, this would be seen as a loss for the United States because I think Trump is looking for an off-ramp, but he can't accept any off-ramp which makes this look like a defeat because he pretty much already declared victory. So he's stressing very strongly that it's Iran that has to fall in line with American demands, not the other way around. So it's going to be very difficult to find a negotiation. And this is why getting into this war was such a disaster, because there's no clear path out of this war.
Right, there is no clear path out of this way. And like you highlighted, a temporary ceasefire is not an end to the war. Now, Trump has previously said he's not ready for a deal yet with Iran and that Iran's relevant capabilities will be completely destroyed within 2 days. He said the terms need to be solid. Do you believe this time around he would share what these terms actually are, apart from an end of Iran's nuclear ambition, of course?
No, it's ambiguous as always, and I don't think this war has anything to do with Iran's nuclear program. If it was, they could get a deal with Iran, just like they did in the past with the JCPOA. The problem is that the United States, it links the nuclear issue to other issues in order to win over the sympathies of the international community, because nobody wants, well, everyone wants restraints on the Iranian nuclear program to make sure it's civilian and doesn't become militarized. But the US always links this to the range of Iranian ballistic missiles, the quantities of ballistic missiles, its partnership with Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas, and essentially what the Americans have been looking for is capitulation. That is for Iran to, well, first they demanded that they don't have any civilian nuclear program, but also that they abandon their conventional deterrent, that is their ballistic missiles and even drones and the regional partnerships. Well, if they would accept this as a peace, then they would have no deterrent, and their only security would rely on the goodwill and benign intentions of the United States and Israel, something that Iran is not willing to bet on. So if it was only a nuclear issue, I think a deal could be very easily achieved, as it has in the past. But it was Trump that walked away from this deal because he wanted other terms. So I think if they want to resolve the nuclear issue, they have to untangle it from the rest and discuss it in, I guess, different bulks, because the way it stands now, it doesn't really make any sense. But the Iranians are now not only interested in how the US should police Iran. Iran also has its own security concerns, which it wants to have addressed. That is, it's surrounded by US military bases, and it's threatened constantly. It has crippling sanctions against it for decades. And as we've seen in every, well, at least the last two negotiations, in the middle of the negotiations, or actually towards the end, when all sides, including the mediator, are saying that they're very close to a deal, the US takes advantage to launch surprise attacks with the purpose of not just regime changing, but destroying Iran. So for this reason, Iran has some serious security concerns, which they also want to have met in any peace agreement.
Right. So those security concerns need to be met, and like you highlighted, that ambiguity still remains on what US exactly wants. Sorry. You were talking about regional partnerships. So I wanted to understand, while Gulf nations are pressing for diplomacy, is it really possible to have it back on the table? And also, a lot of damage has already been done to Iran's neighbors. How do you expect them to react to Araghchi's latest statement?
Well, you can see it two ways. One would be some are arguing that Iran's attacks on the Gulf states, that is the Gulf states which have participated or assisted the US in the surprise attack on Iran, that attacking them has somehow distanced them further from Iran and makes it less likely a deal. I tend to believe the opposite. I think that within many of these countries, they now look towards the partnership with the US, whether or not being frontline states was a good idea. You know, if you go back to the 1990s, it was great. The United States was the only superpower. If you wanted security in the world, just hitch your wagon to the United States and you'll be safe. But in 2026, the US is a declining power, relative terms at least, in a multipolar world. That hegemon will be more desperate in order to attempt to restore its dominance. And under these conditions, I think frontline states will not be that secure anymore. Instead of having security, they made the US presence has invited violence. And now the only reason these countries are being bombed is because they allowed themselves to be used as American frontline states twice within a year to do a surprise attack on Iran. Right. So I think there's a reconsideration now. And if they decouple themselves from the US, then Iran gets what it wants. But otherwise, it wants something along these lines for the US to accept it within a peace agreement. I'm not sure if they can achieve this, but at least this is the objective of the Iranians.
Right. And, one very important piece is now the US has hit the Kharg Island as well, which handles about 90% of Iran's oil. With that, are we seeing the permanent end of safe global trade energy hubs?
Well, if the US go forth with it, it's one thing. Keep in mind, the US began this as war, as a regime change operation. It failed. Then the goal was to escalate military aggression, hope that the Iran's army would fall apart, or at least the government would capitulate if they punished the civilian population enough. That didn't work either. So they go up this escalation ladder. And of course, Iran has responded by closing down the Strait of Hormuz. The ultimate, I guess, nuclear option, you can call it, is for the US to either invade or destroy the energy facilities on Kharg Island, which you said in introduction that they handle 90% of Iran's oil exports. This would be an extreme escalation, because if they do this, cripple Iran's energy exports, then Iran would have to retaliate, and they would have no restraint anymore. And they would probably, and I predict at least, that they would then attack all and every energy facility in all of the Gulf states, essentially shutting down and destroying all their industries. And once they go, these Gulf states, many of them could even cease to exist if they lose their main source of income. So the only reason why Iran hasn't attacked them is because that would be such a dramatic escalation that the US would likely attack Kharg Island. But if the US now attacks Kharg Island, that's what I expect, at least, to be the very predictable response of Iran. So then you're going to see the whole region on fire. And, oil prices I don't think there will be any ceiling anymore. It can just continue to go up. And it wouldn't even matter, I think, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, if all oil tankers and all oil facilities and oil fields are on fire. So I hope that Trump isn't actually considering to do this. As I said, he attacked the military facilities on Kharg Island, I guess as a warning, but the Iranians aren't going to capitulate. So the only response at every end is to escalate further. So at some point, they're going to have to look for an off-ramp, how to de-escalate. And once Kharg Island oil facilities have been attacked, then I think this is out of control. There's no way they can bring this down anymore.
Right. Very important points, Dr. Dennison, you've made. If US continues to attack Kharg, Iran won't have any restraints and it would retaliate, and the whole region would be on fire, and there would be no ceiling on the oil prices. Very important points over there. Thank you for joining us today. On that note, we'll let you go.
Thank you.